As we have so many times before on this show over the course of this past year and even before, we're going to be breaking down a case of extremely blatant corruption inside of the White House, staying on the theme of infrastructure. And so here we have a story involving floods and an organization called the LeFrak Organization, which I hadn't been familiar with, but it's apparently one of the largest privately held real estate firms in the United States. And they're active in politics. Between 2013 and 2016, the LeFrak Organization spent over $300,000 lobbying Congress on what are called flood map issues and other issues, the report states. This is information that had been released. In 2015, for example, the company criticized new federal flood regulations enacted by President Barack Obama in the wake of Hurricane Sandy that required the company to raise the height of a Jersey City site by about 3 feet before construction because this would increase development costs. Well, yes, any sort of protection, like in the case of floods, is going to cost a little bit more money, but there's a reason for it. Floods have been wreaking havoc across the country for a long time, and it seems to be getting worse as climate change continues. But for the LeFrak Organization, having to do these Obama-era regulations would be a little bit more expensive, and so they don't want that. Well, then suddenly we don't have Barack Obama anymore, we have Donald Trump. And the company's chief executive, Richard LeFrak, was appointed by Trump last year to be the co-chair of his infrastructure council, which quickly fell apart. And LeFrak was one of the few remaining members of it. And so he had perhaps some outsized influence over Donald Trump and his agenda. So let's see what he pushed for. Well, last August, Trump signed an executive order rescinding the Obama-era flood rules that had set stricter building standards aimed at reducing flood-related damages and requiring that federally funded infrastructure built along the coastline take into account future projections for sea level rise. And right there, you basically have a 2-for-1. You have the real estate companies not wanting to have to pay more money to make sure that their buildings don't immediately get knocked over the next time there's a flood. And you have an attempt to stick a finger in the eye of environmentalists and regular Americans who are concerned about climate change. So they got those 2 for 1. However, as I said, floods continue. And so in the wake of Hurricane Harvey, the Trump administration seemed to have a change of heart and said it would consider reinstating the flood rules that it had just rescinded. Because immediately after they rescinded it, there was evidence of how terrible that idea was. When all along the coast and in Texas, we had so much flood-related damage. So we had some hope. Perhaps LeFrak was not going to get his way and we would get those regulations again. But unfortunately, it doesn't look like that's going to happen. A leaked version of the latest draft of the White House's infrastructure plan was published by the Washington Post. Any mention of reinstating a version of the flood protection standards is, quote, utterly lacking from the draft, according to people who have read it.
Okay, so first let's note the amusing irony of his infrastructural council crumbling. Apparently not very well built.
Yeah, from the very beginning it was LeFracked.
Secondly, look at how brazen Trump is. He's like, okay, I'm gonna take the guy who stands to gain the most amount of money from infrastructure projects and put him as the head of the infrastructure council. I'm not gonna pretend to have neutrality. I'm not gonna pretend not to be corrupt. I'm just gonna take the guy who's gonna make the most money from it and put him in charge. And he did similar things with Carl Icahn, and then that blew up, and then Icahn had to step aside. He's done it in almost every department. The corruption, it's almost like he is trying to publicize it. He just doesn't care because he thinks it doesn't matter. I could shoot a guy on 5th Avenue and my supporters will still support me. It doesn't matter what I do. It only matters what I say. And so he says that he's draining the swamp, but in reality, his infrastructure council was building the swamp, the infrastructure of the swamp. So, and yesterday on the program, Anna and I covered a story that was an epiphany for me as to why a lot of his supporters don't ever back away from him, because they were told by evangelical leaders that God has chosen him. And obviously God can't be wrong, so God can't change his mind, so you can't change your mind. So he thinks, I'll just rub your face in it. I'll take this guy who's gonna make a lot of money from this and put him in charge of the decisions. Who cares? So now, look, that again fell apart, but the essence of the policy didn't change at all. So why do we need regulations that do cost more money? Like, for example, in California, the housing has to be built to different specs, and it involves a lot of regulation to make sure that the buildings don't fall down during earthquakes. Why? Because we have earthquakes.
Yeah.
And the buildings used to fall down and people would die. Thousands of people would die from the earthquakes. Now we have more regulations and almost nobody dies in those earthquakes. Why? Because the buildings don't fall down.
Yeah.
That is why you need regulations. If you live in an area prone to flooding, like Jersey City, where he was building properties, LeFrak was, and didn't want to pay the extra money for the flooding. Well, it floods there. It floods in Houston. And while you were paying attention for a second during the flooding in Houston, they're like, okay, wait, we'll pause.
Yeah.
We'll pause. Nobody looking. All right, yep, take away the regulations.
Yeah.
Let LeFrak and his buddies do whatever they want. That's the essence of Trump.
Yeah. Yeah, and briefly, if I could try to appeal to those evangelicals on this specific issue, I will grant you that God chose Trump, but God has done other stuff in the past. I mean, back in the day, he gave incredibly detailed impending flood-related regulations to Noah, and that worked out for him. Everyone else was boned.
Yeah, but it cost a lot of money to build that ark, but there was good reasons to spend that money.
Yes.
So because, as you know, flooding happens from time to time.
Yeah.
And so better to be prepared, and nothing is more biblical than that.
You just watched the video by the Young Turks, home of the revolution. If you'd like to get a lot more than that, get the full show by becoming a member. tytnetwork.com/join.